Let's talk about functions and methods. So as usual, I'm going to create a new file, navigate to my code folder, and let's start coding. So let's say we wanted to do something like greeting a person. So I do something like puts good morning, I don't know, good morning, Steve. So let me save this file in my code folder, and I'm going to call it functions.rb. Could be any name. And then let's run this. So ruby functions.rb, and there you go, good morning, Steve. Now let's say we also want to say goodbye Steve, have a great morning. Well, as usual, this would obviously run, but now let's say we wanted to have a kind of a dynamic program that can say good morning when it's morning and good afternoon when it is good afternoon, and so on. So in order to do that, we could do something like, let's say t equals time.now. So I'm going to comment this just for a while, and let's see what this is making. So let's save that. So the code is t equals time now, and then we are calling puts with that variable t. So you might be wondering what t is, since it's not a string, not a number, not anything. So as you saw here on the output, it's saying that today is 1st of October 2020, 11 in the morning, and that's it. So does that mean that this t variable is a string? No, that doesn't mean that, because we could, for instance, do something like, let's say hour. And now if we run this, we are gonna see 11. So what this is doing is that this is calling a function or a method of t that is called hour. So this is essentially extracting the hour component of the time and printing it. So t actually, in this case, it's a variable of type time. You don't have to worry about that now, because we are going to learn more about these types and object orientation, which is what this all is about. Having different types of a variable. But for now, let's just focus that t is a time object, and it has this, we can use this dot notation, and there is a function somewhere, and you don't worry about that now, but there's a function somewhere called hour that is going to extract the hour component of a certain time, and we can use that for whatever we want. Also, we have more options here. So we have, for instance, minute. I think it's not minute, it's actually min, which is just short for minute. So there you go, 3. So if you look at the clock here, you're going to see that we are on minute 3 right now. And that also works for sec, which is going to be the seconds. So 56, which means that soon, so it just changed to the next minute, and now it's second 3 and 5, and if we keep running this again and again, we're gonna see the time passing. That's just about it. So why am I showing this, since this is just something about functions and methods? Well, this is because we can leverage this t.hour to determine whether we are on the morning or in the afternoon or in the evening. For instance, if t.hour, which is always going to return a value between 0 and 23, so 0 is going to be the start of the day and 23 is going to be at the very end of the day. So if t.hour is greater than 0, and if at the same time it is also lesser than 12, we can say that we are in the morning. So this is morning time when these two conditions are true. And if we are on the afternoon, we can say that is true if the hour is greater than or equal to 12. So it's there's kind of two conditions inside here. So it's greater than or equal to. And also, let's say it is less than 6 p.m. So that is less than, so it's if it is between noon and 6 p.m., then we consider it being afternoon. And let's say that evening is gonna be greater than or equal to 6 p.m. and also lesser than 24. So we can say that if both these conditions are true simultaneously, we can say that we are in the morning, and if those two are true, we can say we are in the afternoon, and these two we are on the evening. Now, how can we say this in Ruby? Let's apply something that we learned in the last lesson. So how can we now leverage this? So first, let's do something a little bit clever here. So I told you that hour is always going to be greater than 0. So this hour function is always going to return a value greater than 0 and less than 24. So the maximum value for it is going to be 24 and the minimum value is going to be 0. So this condition is always going to be true. There is no way that this condition is going to be false, because hour is always going to be at least 0. And actually I just noticed that this should have been greater than or equal 0. But we don't need this condition. We don't need it because it is going to always be true. We can just go and say that t_hour, if hour of variable t, if the hour component of variable t is less than 12, then we are in the morning. Now for this one, we need to hold both conditions at the same time, because if t_hour is greater than or equal 12, it could be 20, for instance, which would be also true for this one. So we have to make sure that it's after 12 and before 18. So in order to do that in Ruby, to have a one condition, we use this. So use the ampersand symbol, 2 ampersands. Now what this is doing is saying that, so the way we're going to use this is we're going to put an if here. So if t_hour is greater than or equal to 12, and so this means and at the same time these conditions holds true, then we are gonna execute the code that comes inside this if block. So we call this an if block, which is the code that is going to be between this if statement and this end statement. Let's also do these ifs for these other conditions. So here is also going to be and. There's also going to be an and here. However, if you look at it carefully, I just told you that hour is going to be at maximum 23. So this is always going to be true. There's no way hour is going to be 24 or larger than 24. So this means that we can remove this because it's just redundant. Now, what do we want to do with this now? We want to say that if the hour is in the morning, let's say that phrasing. I could put maybe period. Let's say that we are in the morning period. So it's going to be morning. And in this case, it's going to be afternoon. And also on this case, it's going to be evening. I'm going to say that good plus period plus comma Steve. Let's say it's Steve, could be any name really. And let's put some parentheses here, although they're not necessary. Maybe it makes it a little bit less confusing. But what is this gonna print now? So let me clear my screen. I'm gonna press Ctrl L, and I'm gonna press up, and then I'm gonna press return to run the program again. So it's saying good morning, Steve. Why is it saying good morning, Steve? Well, because naturally, if you look at my clock over here, it's before noon, so we are still on the morning. If we were on the afternoon, would this work? Now the question is, would this work? And since we are getting the current time, how are we going to test this? Well, there are really two ways of testing this. So I'm going to show you the first way, which is going to work on any machine, whether you are running on this Linux setup that I made here, or whether you are running on something else. And we can do, for this first way to do, we have to first include here this require time. I'm not going to explain what this does right now. This is going to stay for a second lesson, but trust me, just put this there. And, oops, instead of saying time now, let's say t equals time.parse. And let me comment this line here, because we don't want the current time now, we want a specific time. So time parse is gonna take a string, and let's say that is gonna be, I don't know, tomorrow. Tomorrow is actually I'm messing this up. It's gonna be 2nd of October, and let's say now that it's gonna be 15:30 with 01 seconds. It's gonna be 15:30. It's gonna be 3 p.m. So what this parse is gonna do, it's gonna take this string, and it has to be, there are a few formats which you can use to describe a time here, but I recommend using this one, which is year, month, day, and then hour, minutes, and seconds. So it's gonna convert all these into an object and into a time object, which we can then extract the hour, for instance, or minutes, seconds, or whatever. So if we run this now, we're gonna see saying, good afternoon, Steve. That's why, that is because the hour is matching now this statement, and also, so it's matching this condition, and it's also matching this condition at the same time. Now, if we change this time now to, let's say, 20, so 8 p.m. Always remember to save the file before running it. There you go, it's gonna be good evening. Good evening, Steve. So I told you about this first method. Now, another method of doing this would be to change the system clock. So if you don't want to use this, if you want to skip using this, and let me, oh, I just deleted it. I'm having a hard time here. Let me just cut and paste it here. And if I want to keep using time now, because it gets the current time, and it's going to be morning, I can, if you're using this Linux box, you can do sudo time date ctl, and then there's a command called set time, and then between quotes, could be double quotes or could be single quotes. And here you're gonna set the system clock to a certain time, and the format of the time is gonna be exactly the same as this one. So let's say we are in 2020, day 3, and it's gonna be, let's say it's gonna be noon, 12:30 noon, and it's gonna ask for my password. So this is the same password. So you type in here, I just typed my password. It's not gonna show the characters. It's the same password that you use to log in into the system. And now if you look at the clock here, it changed the date and it changed the timestamp. And then you execute it again. So I just pressed up. If you keep pressing up on the terminal, you're gonna it gives you a chance to execute previous commands. So since we are in the afternoon, we now say good afternoon, Steve. Good afternoon, Steve. And there you go. So this is the other way of doing it. I'm gonna let the time like that. And yeah, if you want to use this one or if you want to use this one, there's no real difference. Just this one, you have to change your whole system clock. I'm fine with changing my system clock, so yeah, that's good. Now, let's say now that we want to also, we want to also, let me clear this one. We want to also say goodbye to Steve, and we want to say have a great something. So something is going to be the period. So I'm going to press Ctrl L again to clean my screen. And that's going to be good afternoon, Steve. Goodbye, Steve. Have a great afternoon. So let's suppose now that, let's say that our code is going to run in a little bit different than this. So let's say that here we have this puts good and then period Steve. And then here is going to be some more code. I'm just going to use these to represent having a lot more code there. So let's say Steve is using our software and he opens our software in the morning, but he's closing the software just on the afternoon or on the evening, whatever. So in the very beginning, the software would greet Steve with good and then period Steve. So that would be good morning, Steve. However, the way the software is now programmed here, this would mean that because period was calculated whenever the software was opened, in the evening or in the afternoon, whenever Steve was about to close the software, the period would still be so this would have been calculated in the morning, and then we would say goodbye, Steve, have a great morning, but he's actually leaving in the afternoon. So how could we fix that? Well, we could, for instance, copy and paste this. So we would copy this, and let's say I'm gonna put like a comment here, lots of code here. So the software starts running in the morning here, and let's say here is some code or whatever that is gonna be running the software for a few hours, and then at the end of the day or in a different period, so we would want to say goodbye, Steve, have a great, and then whatever period is when the software is ending. So this would work. This would totally work because t is the current time at this moment in time, and this t variable would be replaced with this new time, and then the same code would enter and be run, and we would just say goodbye, Steve. So this would work. However, this is kind of problematic. Why? Because we have duplicated code. So this, we just copied and pasted code. And copy pasting code is something you mainly never want to do in programming. Why? Let's suppose your boss or something, your customer for whom you're writing the software for, or it could be yourself. So whoever would that be would say to you, well, I disagree that evening starts at 6 p.m. I think evening starts at 5 p.m. And then they would ask you to change that. And then you would come here and just change this to 17. So 17 there and 17 here. So afternoon ends at 5 p.m. and evening begins at 5 p.m. Now, the problem here is that you just forgot to change it also here. So it is gonna work with these new requirements, so to say. It's gonna work for the greeting, for the salutation. So it's not gonna work for saying goodbye, for instance. And you would have to come and change also here. So now you had to change in 4 different places. So that's really bad. So you want to avoid that. And in order to avoid duplication of code and to make things just easier for you, you probably want to use something called functions. So what is a function? Well, let's start by declaring a function. So I'm going to come here in the very beginning of the file and say def, and it's going to be period name, and it's going to get current time, and then end. And now I'm going to take all this and I'm going to cut and paste it inside here. I'm gonna also select and press tab so it is spaced a little bit to the right. And also I'm gonna come over here and delete these. So now, is this code working? No, definitely it's not working. So this is not gonna work. Let's see what happens if we run this. There you go. So variable period is not defined, of course, because we are not defining it. How we are not defining it? I mean, we are defining it here. Now, what happens here is that we have this, what is called a function declaration. So to declare a function in Ruby, you use the def keyword. So it's always going to be def. I think it means define or whatever. And then you have the function name, which can be anything you want. So in this case, the name of the function is period underscore name. And within parentheses are going to be the function arguments. So they can be called function arguments or function parameters. It doesn't matter. It's just that a function, like in mathematics, it receives some argument, some input, that it's then able to do some calculation or something with that input, and it also is going to emit an output. So the function is going to return something back to whoever is calling the function. So, for instance, let's start using this function. Maybe understand better what I'm telling. So now I'm going to say period equals and then period name and t. And now I'm gonna also copy paste this here. And I have to make a little change here and just say period here at the end. And then I can save this and run it. Oops. So yeah. So actually, I'm using this t variable here, but this t variable is not defined. So I have to change it to current time. So I'm also gonna copy and replace all the instances of t with current time. So current time. then run it again. And there you go. So good morning, Steve. Goodbye, Steve. Had a great morning. So what is happening here? So to understand this, it's important to understand the flow of execution of any Ruby file. So in Ruby, the code is always executed from top to bottom. So it's gonna run first line, and then it's gonna run line number 2, and then line number 3, and so on and so forth. Now, we have here, just at line number 2, we have a function declaration. So this function declaration, it is not executing this code. So in this case, once the Ruby runtime runs the function, whatever code is on line number 2 here, which is a function declaration, it is opening a block and saying, okay, I want to declare this function. And this here until this final end here. So this is the contents of my function. This is the code of my function. So the function period name has this argument, and whenever it is executed, which is not gonna be now because we are only declaring it, we are not executing the function, but whenever we execute it, it's gonna run this code. And then it means that on line number 2, it is gonna declare this function. So on line number 1, while the code was, when the code is first run, line number 1, if you try to call the function period name here on line number 1, you would not be able, because this function has not yet been declared here in line 1. It was only declared in line 2. So whenever this is declared, then you continue to execute after the function declaration. So you can think of it like Ruby is going to execute line number 1, and then on line number 2 it's going to declare a function, and then it's going to jump all the way to line 22 here, and then it's going to continue executing it. So now on line 22, this code was not executed. However, we now have the period name function declared. So if we wanted to use this period name function here, we already could, because it's already defined. So this is very important to understand that although the flow of execution is top-bottom, there are exceptions. So in this case, it jumped all the way to here. And now, so whenever we are executing this, we can think of execute line 1, execute line 2, which declares the function, then go to, after this end statement, execute line 22, which is just empty, and then execute line 23, which is just saying t equals, and then it's going to be the current time, because time.now returns the current time, so that's going to be the time whenever this line was executed. And after that, it's going to execute line 24. So what is line 24 doing? Well, it is saying first, call this function. So this is how you call a function. You state the name of the function, and then if the function has arguments, which is true for period name, because period name has an argument here, you have to pass this current time argument. And then you open parentheses and you pass t. So in Ruby, you don't have to put the parentheses. So they are optional. You could do this, would be the exact same thing. But if you are a beginner, I would recommend that you use parentheses, because it can become a little bit confusing without the parentheses. So just use them for now, and let's talk just later about not using parentheses. So period is going to be period name t. So what this means? This means that this function is going to be called, or you can also say that this function is going to be invoked which means that the code now is gonna go all the way to line 2. But it's not only gonna go to line 2, it is also gonna remember that we were executing line 24. So it put somewhere in the memory, and I don't want to enter in detail right now where on memory this information that says, okay, we were executing line 24. I don't want to talk about that now, but trust me, there's certainly somewhere in memory where it is putting this information that after executing this, you're going to come back to line 24 and continue running whatever you stopped or wherever you jumped to the period name function. So what is going to happen here is it is going to go all the way to line 3. So it's going to go all the way to line 3. And in addition to that, so it's going to say, okay, we're going to go to line 3 right now. And whenever we are, so we're going to execute all of this until this end block. And after we finish executing this, we are also going to go back to line 24. In addition to this, we are also passing these parameters. So we are saying here t. And what does that t have to do with this current time? Well, the thing is that this current time is gonna receive the value of t. So t is the value that is inside the variable t is gonna now temporarily, just during the execution of this function, the current time is gonna assume the value that was in the variable t whenever this function was called. So this is also very important for you to memorize. So now we are here on line 3, and what we know is that current time is whatever was in the value of t, and then we are just executing this code. So you can just think of it like this was this t thing here. And then it's just gonna execute this thing, declare the period variable, and do all these things. And so whenever we are executing line 19, we are definitely going to have some value in the period variable. So period is going to be either morning or afternoon or evening. So it's going to be one of these 3 options. And this line, so this line may look odd to you, but the fact that this line is the last line of the function, it means that the value of this variable is going to be returned. So, for instance, if it's going to be returned and it's going to assume this this function invocation here. So, for instance, if we were to be in the morning, which is true for the time being on my clock over here, it would be just like the same thing of saying morning here. So it would be the same thing. If we were on the evening, it would be kind of the same thing here. So period equals evening. And that is because, let me just go back here. That is because whenever you call this function this way, the return value of the function is gonna replace this thing, but it's not gonna replace for real. Like, it's not gonna replace always. It's gonna replace whenever we are running this. So that means that period is gonna have the morning, afternoon, or evening value, and now we can just continue to run it. So what happens now? Well, we just continue to run. We continue to run, and here we hit it again. So we are saying t equals time now, and since we can, we can suppose that some time passed in between here. Let's say a few hours passed on, and on line 34, whenever you call this time now, it's gonna return the current time. So the current time of the execution of this line. So if suppose it's executing this line at let's say 2 p.m. So 2 p.m. it's executing it. The code has reached this line, is now executing it. Then time, the t variable would be today 2 p.m. And then we would call this period name passing this t, and we would also go to line 3. But whenever we go to line 3 on this instance, remember what I said before. It's not only gonna go to line 3, it is gonna store the information. Okay, we are currently in line 35 and we want to go to line 3, but whenever you finish executing whatever you need on this period name function, you go back to line 35 and not to line 24, for instance. So you're going to go back to line 35. And so you call this, you pass this t, which before had some value, but now has some different value because time has passed. So we are gonna go here and we are gonna execute since, and this current time variable is gonna of course have the value of t, and since the value of t is, let's say 2 p.m., this current time is gonna be 2 p.m., which means that these conditions are gonna hold true because hour is gonna be greater than or equal 12, because it's going to be 14, and less than 17. So period is going to be afternoon. And then on line 16, this is not going to be true. Therefore, this code is not going to execute because this code is only going to be executed if. So that's why it's called if. So this is going to only be executed if this condition holds true. Same thing for this one. So if we are on 2 p.m., which is hour 14, this means this is false because 14 is not less than 12. So if this is true, this is going to be executed. But if this is not true, it is going to go all the way after this end declaration. This is the end. So this end belongs to this if, and this end here belongs to this def. So this signs a beginning of a definition, and this signs the end of this definition, and this end signs the end of this if block. And well, you see that I hope you see this kind of pattern of blocks of code. So here we have a block of code which is executed whenever this function is called. And here we have a block of code which is executed whenever this if condition is true. Here we have another block of code which is executed whenever this condition is true, and so on. I hope you realize this this pattern of having blocks of codes. So I'm gonna talk later on a different lesson a little bit more about these blocks of codes, but this is something that exists on any programming language. However, Ruby has also a different notion of block. It has a special notion of block of code, but I'm going to talk about that in a different lesson. We don't have to worry about that right now. So once this gets executed, this last line, and if you're still confused by this last line, what this is doing is so the fact that it is the last line of this block here, it means that it's going to be the output value of this function, or you could also say that it's going to be the return value of this function. So a function has some inputs and some output or a return value, and whatever is on the last line is going to be the return value. I'm gonna show you an example of this. So let's make sure this file is saved. If I run this, and we are definitely now on the morning, we're gonna see good morning Steve, goodbye Steve, have a great morning. But what if what if the last line now is the number 500? So let me save this. What is going to happen? Well, we have a problem. Let's say it's have a grade. Let's put it day. Let's put just day here, so it's just easier. So it's gonna say good day, Steve, and goodbye, Steve. Have a great day. So what does that mean? Well, that means now that line 20 is referring to the period variable. However, it is not doing anything with it. So line 20, in fact, is doing just the same as line 19, which is nothing. So this line is doing nothing. And you might think that this line is also doing nothing, but magically you just saw this day value here and here. So although it seems like this line is doing nothing, only for the fact that this is the last line, it is automatically going to be the return value of this function. So if you comment this, and run it again, what is going to happen? There you go. You're going to see morning again. Why? But, well, you can ask yourself, okay, wasn't this the last line? Well, let's say that, yeah, this is the last line, but it is a comment. So a comment is not code, it's just a comment. And this line here is line 21, is also not the last line. I mean, it's just an empty line. So it is not considered as code. That's why only the last, so we could even go as far as to say as the last statement within this function declaration block. So the last statement is gonna be the return value. So since an empty line is not stating anything, and a comment for whomever is reading the code, of course, a comment is going to be something useful. But for the Ruby interpreter, a comment is going to be nothing. So it's not going to consider it as being a statement. That's why this line is not a statement, and this line here is also not a statement. So this is really the last statement, and that's why it is the output or the return value of this function. So this is mostly it for this lesson. So I'm gonna leave more than this for the next lesson, but that's it. What I'm gonna challenge you a little bit is I wanted to see the relation of this period here that is declared inside or within this block, and what is the relation between this and this period that is being declared here. Now, think of it in terms of if I delete this assignment and you go, so now the code is going to execute line 23 and then line 25, and it's going to call this function, which is going to declare a value for this period. And if I try to run this, you're going to see that there's going to be an error. Now, why is there an error? If this is being declared here, why is line 27, and you can see here that the error is happening on line 27, why is this not working? So try to come up with an answer for that. If you don't manage to do it, it's fine. We're going to see that on a different lesson. So that's it for now. See you in the next lesson.